This is Prime Crime Network.
What may be the most gruesome crime in Volusia County's history is coming back into the spotlight.
Yes, sentencing is now scheduled to be next week for two of the people convicted in what's known as the Xbox murders. They were tried for the deaths of 6 people and a dog in Deltona back in 2004.
West News' Claire Metz reports on the new push for death sentences against Troy Victorino and Jerome Hunter.
Telford Lane was a nightmarish crime scene when law enforcement arrived in August of 2004. 6 young people beaten with bats, stabbed with knives, a dog stomped to death. Evidence of the violence in almost every room of the house. Ringleader Troy Victorino was angry that he'd been discovered squatting in the then vacant home by the owner's granddaughter, victim Erin Belanger. And angry she still had some of his belongings, including an Xbox game. The murders have often been called the Xbox killings. Ms. Belanger was in the house with friends Michelle Nathan, Francisco Io Ramon, Anthony Vega, Roberto Gonzalez, and Jonathan Gleason on the night of August 6th when Troy Victorino orchestrated a massacre.
It's my testimony that I'm innocent and I was not at that crime scene.
Victorino, along with Jerome Hunter, Robert Cannon, and Michael Salas, were connected to the crimes. And in 2006, Victorino, Hunter, and Salas were tried, convicted, and sentenced. Cannon did not go to trial, taking a plea deal right before the start. Cannon and Salas got life in prison, but Victorino and Hunter were sentenced to death. In 2017, those death sentences were overturned because the jury verdicts were not unanimous. Troy Victorino and Jerome Hunter were booked into the Volusia County Jail Monday in advance of the resentencing hearing set to begin next week. This will only be about sentencing. The first-degree murder convictions against the men stand. The state attorney's office is again seeking the death penalty against the 2 men, though this time a jury's recommendation will have to be unanimous, or the defendants will get life in prison. Jury selection begins Monday morning.
Attorneys for one of the convicted men filed a motion asking that the resentencing hearings be separated. The judge denied that motion.
Prime Crime Network.
It was exclusive
for a gruesome murder from nearly 20 years ago. It was August of 2004 when 6 people and a dog were found dead inside a home on Telford Lane in Deltona. Investigators say they were beaten to death, and a known gang member orchestrated the murders because he was mad someone took his Xbox from the house he was living in as a squatter. 2 men, Troy Victorino and Jerome Hunter, were sentenced to death in 2006 for the crime. But that was later overturned because the jury's decision was not unanimous.
State of Florida versus Jerome Hunter and State of Florida versus Troy Victorino.
Appearing as co-defendants, Troy Victorino and Jerome Hunter were back in a Volusia County courtroom this morning. This as the state is once again working to convince a jury to recommend a death sentence for the convicted murderers. It was August 2004 when 6 people and a dog were found beaten to death inside a home on Telford Lane in Deltona. Victorino, a known gang member, orchestrated the crime along with 3 others because he was upset someone took his Xbox from the house he had been squatting in. Both Victorino and Hunter were sentenced to death in 2006, but that was later overturned because the jury's decision wasn't unanimous. It's a change that happened after a Florida Supreme Court ruling in 2016. Today, the state and defense began the selection process from a pool of about 100 jurors. Once the jury is narrowed down, they will eventually decide whether to recommend death by a unanimous vote. If not, the sentence will be life in prison without the possibility of release. Jury selection for the new sentencing is expected to take several days. We'll be watching for the developments throughout the week and keep you updated with the latest.
Prime Crime Network.
It was exclusive.
And now a convicted murderer will be resentenced, and this time he could face the death penalty again.
And this all stems actually from the cruel murders of 6 roommates in Deltona over an Xbox. Fox 35's Matt Trezza gives us a preview of tomorrow's court hearing.
It was a senseless crime that stunned Central Florida. The brutal killings of 6 people, ranging in ages from 34 to just 17, and a dog. Sheriff Ben Johnson, Volusia County's then sheriff, described the massacre.
A lot of trauma, a lot of blood splatter, and it's just a very, very brutal crime.
The year was 2004, and the crime came to be known as the Xbox murders. 4 men, Troy Victorino, Jerome Hunter, Michael Salas, and Robert Cannon, were all convicted of the grisly killings. Deputies say they used bats and knives to kill the 6 people at the house, all because one of them allegedly took things from Victorino, including an Xbox game console. Orlando attorney Albert Yanfa says the crime was shocking.
The heinousness of this crime is just horrific. What these individuals were convicted of.
Salas and Cannon were sentenced to life in prison. Victorino, the ringleader, and Hunter were sentenced to death. But the jury's decisions at the time were not unanimous. A later change to state law decided that Florida's death penalty had to be unanimous, so their sentences switched to life in prison.
The United States Supreme Court decided in Hurst v. Florida that Florida's sentencing statute was unconstitutional. Reason being, it only required a majority as opposed to unanimous. And what the United States Supreme Court said was that violated the 6th Amendment.
Now, with a new change in state law, there'll be a new sentencing hearing set for Tuesday to see whether Victorino and Hunter will return to death row.
So if the jury recommends 8-4 for death, that's taken as a 12-0 for death, right? If the jury decides for life in prison as opposed to death, the judge has to impose life.
But if the jury votes for death, either unanimously or in a majority decision, Yanfa says there may still be years of appeals and further hearings to come. In Orlando, Matt Trezza, Fox 35 News.
Crime Network.
It was exclusive.
Detective Anthony Buglioni relived Stephen Hayes' 70-minute emotionless confession for the jury, taken shortly after he was arrested for the murders of Jennifer Petitt and her 2 daughters. Buglioni says Hayes told him he and his accomplice, Joshua Komistarjevsky, had become friends at a halfway house where they attended AA meetings. Desperate for money, they came up with a plan. Police say the pair had a couple of drinks and targeted the Petitt home, beating Dr. William Petitt with a bat. They tied up his wife and daughters, and things quickly spun out of control. A bank book showed the Petitts had $30,000 in an account, so Hayes took Jennifer to withdraw cash. She can be seen here in this bank surveillance video.
We have a lady who is in our bank right now who says that her husband and children are being held at their house.
Hayes stopped at a gas station and filled up containers with gasoline. The attendant also testified Wednesday.
My skin crawls. I feel nothing but disgust about the whole situation.
While Hayes was out, Komistarjevsky was supposed to put the family in the car and then the pair would burn down the house. Instead, he sexually assaulted 11-year-old Michaela and told Hayes to do the same to Mrs. Petitt to, quote, square things up. He complied, and police say the men then set the fire. It was too much to bear for Dr. Petitt, the lone survivor, who left the courtroom right before the medical examiner was set to testify.
It was another tough and painful day for the Hawk and Petitt families, and I think everybody saw that who listened to the testimony.
Thank you for watching Crime Network, your source for urban and suburban and around the world news. Hit the subscribe, like, and the notification bell. And check us out on PrimeCrimeNetwork.com.